Do you think life is simpler as time evolves? For some, it can be more complicated when facing issues about health, estate plans, probate, long-term care, and more. That's why Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell hosts ElderTalk with TuckerAllen, providing intelligent answers for those thinking about their future. Here's Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of ElderTalk. This week we have a return guest, somebody that you guys deemed popular last time. We talked about financial planning. It was more in the COVID environment, which to some extent we're still in the COVID environment.
Somewhat, hopefully on the back end.
Yeah, I think the clouds are starting to clear. So this guest is somebody that can talk to us about retirement and life as it relates to money. So it's a broader topic, and that's the reason I think it especially speaks to a lot of our audience who are still trying to figure out to what extent are they going to continue a career? Are they going to maybe do something different part-time? We have a lot of people who are doing that. So this is an expert on those subjects. Why don't you give a better introduction to our guest?
Yes, we are so pleased to have Frazier back. She's a certified financial planner and also the Forbes Book author of Financially Free, 11 Conversations to Have with Yourself About Life, Money, and Worth. Welcome back.
Oh, well, it's great to be back.
So, Andi, I want to ask you something. How often do you hear, I'm so worried about running out of money during retirement? And what is your response to that? Because I think that's a concern with all retirees and those entering into retirement.
Absolutely. You know, I work with my father, and so our practice has been around for 31 years. And so we have clients of all ages, and maybe even over half of our clients are in that stage of retirement or getting to that point of retirement. And so this is a concern that I hear several times a day, quite frankly. It's a real concern for people in terms of how long can they let their money last, what's going to happen in the market. And there's a lot of fear out there right now still, even though the markets are doing very well. So I hear it all the time.
Oh, and what do you say to relieve those fears?
Well, the first thing
or is there any good answer?
Well, wait, let me set it up differently. Tell us what the categories are that people are in when they're asking this question. For example, I assume some people are fully retired already, and so they've kind of made the decision. They've left their jobs. And then I assume there's some, though, that haven't retired yet. Maybe they're in their early 60s. Maybe they're even mid to later 60s, and they're ready to leave a job. And so they have a different question. They're trying to decide, do they shift gears or do they continue working? Can you talk about each of those groups? I assume their perspectives are a little different.
Absolutely. So I'll address the first one that you talked about, somebody that's already in retirement. And what I hear from them is we've already maybe sat down and talked about their planning and what kind of income streams they have available to them and how to situate themselves so they get a regular check and maybe even have some money that they can play around with and travel and do other things if they want to do that. And those people, quite honestly, are very concerned about what they're hearing in the news. There's a lot of fear still out there, even though our economy is starting to perhaps pick up after COVID. There's a lot of concern and fear. So we're constantly having conversations with that group about just settling their emotions and making sure that they're calm and they're not reacting to something they might hear on the news media throughout the day. And
some of them probably fear another 2008 where their income is cut in half in weeks, essentially.
Right. Bad time.
Yeah, there's a lot of change. And, certainly the political environment adds to that concern for a lot of them. They don't know what's true, what's not true, and how it even impacts them. So that's their primary concern there. And so what we really try to tell them is we certainly are very conservatively investing with those folks. And so we tell them that they're well diversified, that we're looking at their accounts frequently and that we can make changes as needed. And we're just trying to kind of settle their nerves because we've done good planning and now they just need to let that play out, as you will, and not get so wrapped up in the day-to-day movement of what they're hearing and seeing out there.
And then there's the group that they're still working and they were pretty confident maybe a year ago they were getting ready to retire. And now maybe I suspect they're wondering, do I need to continue doing this for a while?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are reevaluating how they want to be in retirement. In the old days, it was you retired and you kind of, did your own thing, and maybe you played golf or you joined a bridge club or you just kind of relaxed. And now we find more and more people are wanting to stay engaged into either their work activities by being consultants or whatnot, or they want to volunteer or even pick up another kind of passion career, if you will. So I think
And
people
that's a
are.
healthy thing, right?
Yeah, totally. It's healthy. I think it's important for people to feel they have purpose in retirement. And then we let the financial part of it, really support them in what they want to do there.
Do you find a lot of clients do that maybe after being retired a year or two and think, okay, I do need to get back into the game?
Yeah, there's so many things about retirement that people fail to look at until perhaps they've actually, decided they're going to retire. It's not just about the money. It's also about what will they do with their time? How will they adapt to maybe not having those work colleagues and friends that they were around for many, many years? And so there's a transition process that many people go through. So for the first few years, we're touching base with them quite frequently to see how they're feeling about what they're doing. And I do find a lot of people initially retire and travel or take time off. And then all of a sudden, after a year or so, they want to start getting back into some level of work, not for the financial reasons always, but just to have a sense of purpose and something to keep them occupied.
Now, you've focused most of your career with women, right? And who would you say worries about retirement and money overall, men or women?
I actually think that women worry about it a lot more than you might think because they typically outlive their male counterparts.
That's
And
a
they may
fact.
have
That's
two,
true.
yeah, yeah, they have two incomes coming in if they're married in a traditional marriage. And then all of a sudden, if their partner is no longer around, now they're living on less. The bills really haven't been cut in half. And there's no one to take care of them if they need maybe assisted living or any kind of nursing care. Whereas before, when they were with their partner, they could have taken care of them. And so I find a lot of women are really concerned about outliving their money and making sure they have someone that can, some means to take care of them if they need that additional assisted living nursing
Right.
home type of environment.
And don't you feel that maybe it's not fully natural for people to retire? I'm thinking this must be a kind of a new, maybe a 20th century concept, may even go back to the 19th century. But I can't believe that most of humanity has been coming to a point where, okay, I've done my hunting and gathering, and now I'm at that point, it'd be 40. And now I'm 40, I'm going to retire. It seems that as human beings, we are healthier when we're striving for things. When we're expending effort and demanding things of ourselves, for some reason our bodies thrive.
Right. I can't imagine ever fully retiring.
Yeah, and maybe that the standard should be something like if there's a passion that you're going to, which presumably is something that is productive. By productive, I mean beneficial to others,
Right.
not just you. And if there's that, then I get it. So that may be somebody who doesn't need to work for income, but they quote unquote work because they're doing something really productive. It may be church, maybe ministry, could be
Working for a nonprofit.
any nonprofit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Greenpeace. So, I mean, there are things we can still continue to do to be productive members of the world. But the idea that at some point you just quit doing things productive and go sit on a beach, that doesn't seem healthy or admirable.
Yeah.
Is that in your message at all? How do you have these conversations with clients? Does it ever enter these realms of
Yeah.
kind of philosophy almost?
Absolutely. When someone's considering making this kind of transition out of work or changing their work environment, I think you're right. A lot of people are not retiring like they used to. And so part of our process is to talk with them about what their vision is for the next 10, 20, 30 years. What do they still want to do maybe that they haven't done? We encourage them to revisit their values, to look at their bucket list, to be thinking about how they're going to spend those years because we can make the money work as long as we know what will keep them happy. And for many people, they want to launch a new career, start a new business, or like you said, volunteer. We work a lot with nonprofits and ministers and clergy in our practice. So we are very familiar with people who are wanting to take a different role and not maybe work for a nonprofit, but contribute and volunteer their time.
Now, you did a recent blog, I noticed, about caregivers. So some retirees may not have that option to stay in the game because they may have an elderly parent that they have to take care of.
Yeah, I wrote that article after taking care of my parents in January when both of them came down with COVID
Oh, my
together.
goodness.
Wow. January of this year.
Both
This
of them.
year, yeah, and I work with my father, so I'm taking care of them and running we have two businesses and in my consulting business, so it was quite a way to start the year for me. But
I bet.
it definitely hit me that there's a lot more we need to talk about regarding caregiving, that there is a lot of stress to the caregiver, and they just want to do what's right for the people that they're caring for. And that's another aspect of what women have to deal with that perhaps their male counterparts don't, is that we're not only taking care of ourselves and our families, but in many cases taking care of a parent or an in-law or an older relative. And it's not just about taking care of them financially. It's about taking care of them physically and
Right.
mentally and emotionally. And that can really be, a lot to have to process when you yourself are trying to, do your own thing and run your own family.
It's funny, that ties in with, we had guests on a few weeks ago, and they work with, they're consultants for nursing homes, meaning that they talk to people, their clients are individuals, and they come to them and say, guide us to the proper long-term care facility. So it may not be a nursing home, maybe it's skilled care, maybe it's assisted living, maybe it's independent living.
Right.
So that's what they do, so they're a consultant, which kind of makes sense, as complicated as that whole field is, that you need someone to guide you through it. So I asked one of the guests, I said, so who is it that makes the initial contact to you whenever you're developing these clients? And without pause, he said, 19 out of 20 times it's the daughter or the daughter-in-law. So even if you have sons and no daughters, it'll be the daughter-in-law that will be taking care of your parents more. And that surprised me. But as I think about it, it doesn't surprise me. So you're right. There is this practice or this almost natural law where for some reason it's these wives in these relationships who are taking care of these tasks.
Yeah.
And
I found that with my father-in-law.
Really?
Yes. I was doing a lot.
You were the one making the calls and trying to help line up care and all that.
And don't get me wrong, my husband did quite a bit too, but taking care of a lot of, financial situations and, selling his house and things like that, and, caring for him before he went into skilled care, making sure he ate.
And also women, though, as you pointed out a while ago, I think I read there's an average of 7 years difference in lifespan. So there is a lot more vulnerability, especially if we assume, as was true in the past, I don't think it'll be true very long, if at all now, is that the men were the source of most of the financial wealth because of their careers. They were getting higher pay, et cetera. I think that's going to be a thing of the past, but you can certainly see how women are more vulnerable at this stage, perhaps, than their male counterpart.
Right.
For sure. It's about also not just taking care of where they're going to live and how they're going to pay for it and whatnot, but it's also about making sure they're fed, that their house is clean, that they have a ride to the doctor, that they have, there's a nurturing part of it that I think that maybe women are just more inclined to provide.
Yeah. So whenever you're talking to clients and they're considering, what is it that they do from here, do you often ask them to what extent they want to continue to be meaningful contributors to others? Or do you find that there are a lot of people who seem quite content to pursue, whatever their individual hobbies might be, or whether it's television or crossword puzzles or whatnot? Actually, I'm thinking of a couple of family members, not close family members, I can say. But I just look at that life and it seems so empty. I don't want to dwell too much on this point, but we're talking to people who are 60 and 65 and beyond. And if we can't agree that we're here to do something more than just consume and pursue pleasure.
Right.
Yeah, we have a process that we take our clients through in terms of having them kind of dream about what they want. And so we like to have clients think about that last stage in those three different stages. We call it the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years, and kind of have them visualize that and plan for that. And then we can help them plan financially to support those decisions.
We've heard that a few times before.
Yeah.
I think it's really applicable to most people's situations.
And, I've heard too of retirees, once they retire, they're taking care of their grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that?
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, that's posed a whole new challenge during all of the issues with COVID. But I do have a lot of our clients that are doing that, and they find it joyful. But there comes a point when they also are finding it to be, maybe it's too much for them to handle at some point, where they're having to cut back on that a little bit, and they want to enjoy some quiet time too. I guess it depends on each individual situation.
And the kids too. I can see where that would be a motivator to go back to work.
Yes, it depends on the grandkids.
Right.
But
yeah, sure.
I've seen that too, and you're right. On the one hand, it gives great pleasure to people who are older. I haven't gotten to the point where I have grandkids yet, but
someday
everyone has assured me that they're just joyous, to be a grandparent and to be around the grandkids. But also know that there's a point where it is stressful, and sometimes, the grandparents have more of the grandkids than perhaps they would prefer.
Right.
So I think there's a balance, and I know that that's an important role to play. I mean, there's more going on there than babysitting. I mean, there's teaching values and the history of the family, so they're getting a sense of continuity. So I think it's marvelous when multiple generations can spend time with each other, especially time with the youngest generation.
Right.
And so I see a role there. So whenever you're talking about investments, Andy, let's talk a little bit about the financial side. So what are your recommendations for a client who's, say, 65 or 70, they're going to go ahead and retire. They, of course, are eligible to get Social Security. Presumably they are getting Social Security. What are the basics that you tell them regarding their money?
Well, certainly I want to look at all the different resources and income streams that they have available to figure out what's the best way to bring income into their world, what's going to give them the best tax advantages. What are their goals? If there's a legacy they want to leave, then perhaps there's a different type of planning than would be if they didn't plan for that. And kind of where they stand today, and thinking about how we can make their money last, but be able to provide them the income that they really need. And so it certainly does vary between clients depending on all the things that we have. I will tell you that I think that most clients are looking for some steady income coming in, not just Social Security, but something they can count on to help supplement those basic bills. And then the next layer is, what is some extra money that they can have coming in that perhaps might be a little bit more subject to the market. So they can not take it 1 month if they don't need it, but they might take it a little extra when they want to do something special. And then finally, we look at the role that other things play in their lives, like life insurance. A lot of people are finding that life insurance allows them to have a little bit more freedom with their investable assets if they keep it through retirement. So we're having a lot of older people, keeping life insurance and finding that it gives them a lot more permission to spend down the other assets because they have it there. So it's a really interesting dynamic to look at.
So when you talk about these sources of income, one, of course, Social Security, another that is very reliable, and one that perhaps is more discretionary. What's an example of a more reliable additional source?
Well, a lot of people will look towards annuities to do that, just because they know that they have that stability of income for the rest of their lives, or for their life and maybe their partner's life. And so annuities might be a good resource for that. I don't think annuities are a fit for every client, but I do think that it's a fit for a lot of people, especially if they have limited invested assets to their, that they can draw from. And so we look to see when it's applicable to use that. And then there's other people that are very comfortable in portfolios where they don't mind having a little bit of volatility, a slight, variance there. And so they're very comfortable in taking money on a regular basis out of those irregular investment portfolios. And so I think that, it really depends on the behavior of the client. If I find that their client's really nervous and is not able to handle the ups and downs of the market, then maybe an annuity might be a better fit for them just for the stability case of it. But annuities are, certain savings accounts are so low right now, we really don't use them, or CDs like we used to. It really needs to be something that's invested somewhere to outpace inflation.
Have you had a lot of clients that have expressed concern with the new White House administration?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I got a couple of calls on Friday about just that, about the impending tax legislation, about
Yeah.
what's going to happen. And certainly there's a lot of concern right now amongst everyday people about this proposal of the stepped up in basis going away. People who've had a family home for many, many years that they want to pass on to their kids or their grandkids. And they're not in a wealthy, tax bracket. They're not wealthy individuals on, by most people's account, but they want to be able to pass that home. And now they're having to reevaluate some of those decisions with this impending tax legislation that might go through. So while we say it's going to tax the wealthy, it's going to affect everyday people.
Yeah, and especially the estate and trust tax changes that are considered.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I have a lot of people who have, they're talking about lowering that threshold to 3.5 million. There's a lot of people that have accumulated that in retirement to live on. And so all of a sudden now they could be thrust into a situation where they're having to pay estate tax on top of that, or their heirs will. And so it's definitely going to be an interesting conversation to have going forward if some of this gets put into place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a rapidly changing world, and it's really hard in this environment to make plans. One could argue, well, there's always uncertainty about the future. There is, but certainly, there are periods where it just seems very, very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And these times are unprecedented. I mean,
to say the least,
we've never had quantitative easing as we have here. We've never had the Fed to issue this amount of currency in such a short period of time. And now we have a fiscal policy where there's going to be $6, $7, $8, we don't know, $1 trillion spent in addition to what the Fed has done. These are unexplored territories, and for people to be able to make a prediction that fails and correct and move forward, that's a luxury only afforded to the relatively young. When you're 65 and 70, there's not that much opportunity, not to mention 85 and or older. Then if you get this wrong, then you're probably going to live with the consequences for the rest of your life.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is hard to be really risk-seeking or risk-prone in this environment. But on the other hand, when I think about annuities, I'm curious about your thoughts about this. I think that in such a low interest rate environment, you commit potentially to a long-term level of income that will cost you a whole lot more money than it would have cost you, say, 25 years ago, given the rates of return.
I think it depends on the annuity products. There's a lot of great products out there. There's so many bells and whistles to annuities, though. I have to say that you really have to work with somebody who has the ability to look at many different types of annuity products to find the right product to fit that situation that you're in, because there's just a lot of moving parts. And so fixed annuities are not something that we look at all that much. But with other kinds of annuities, there's some, indexed annuities and things that can be fits for the right clients. But trying to explain that to clients is certainly still the biggest challenge, because there are so many levers to pull on these annuities, and trying to explain how it works is probably the biggest challenge of them all. Not finding the right one, but just explaining it to people on how it works.
Yeah, it all seems very complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated for the advisor to figure it out, because you're dealing with multiple companies, multiple products. If this happens, then you can do this, and if this, so it's constantly something that we're educating ourselves on quite frequently. What is the new and latest thing today, so that we can at least advise our clients appropriately?
Yeah, and of course there are substantial fees typically involved
Yeah.
with annuities, and clients have to calculate what those costs would be. But it's interesting the point you make about so you can get a inflation adjusted option, right? In other words, you can have a payment that will adjust for inflation, will adjust for changes in interest rates, kind of like universal life in an annuity package. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's also now, with some of these index and equity index annuities, you have these caps and floors, and so you can, earn a lot, but it's capped at a certain level, but it won't fall below a certain level, and so it depends on how much you're taking out as to whether those stay in place, and so there's just so many different moving parts to it. And I will say it's something to look at, and it's not the right fit for everybody. But if you find a client that is very anxious about the market in general, and having that consistency of income is sometimes worth it to them to pay a little bit of an extra fee, perhaps, in order to have that stability across the line. And so it really does depend on each independent person's situation and what other resources they have available.
And what about long-term care? Is this a subject you talk about with your clients? I mean, the possibility that they would spend some time in assisted living or skilled care?
Yeah, so long-term care has really changed over the years. I can remember maybe 10 or 15 years ago when we talked about long-term care, many people would buy a single maybe policy like to cover long-term care costs. And now what we see is a lot of people are looking to find a hybrid product where if they don't need that for long-term care, they have it to either use typically like an annuity or maybe it provides some sort of death benefit. And so there's a lot of interesting hybrid products out there that people are looking at so that they don't just lose if they don't need long-term care, assistance. Having said that, long-term care costs are increasing. We're finding that people are living in these facilities 7 to 10 years versus the 18 to 24 months they used to. And that's largely due to cognitive issues. So it could be an enormous cost, $150,000 to $250,000 a year for that kind of, depending on the kind of care that you need. And that can drain a bank account real quick.
And the insurance is prohibitive because of that, meaning that there were pricing errors that were made in the early days around the turn into this century. Genworth and others sold prices that were effectively underpriced, and they had made actuarial calculations that were a little too optimistic, or they didn't anticipate the level of medical technology and pharmacology that would come along. So now they're finding that they're way in the hole from the premiums that they got. And GE, many of their problems are related to their efforts to sell that subsidiary for which they right now have escrowed over $30 billion to cover claims that were not projected in the premiums. So I guess to buy it now when it's correctly priced, it must be very expensive, but there aren't that many companies selling it now, are there?
I have to tell you, right off the top of my head, I don't know that I can tell you any company that's really selling a single kind of traditional long-term care policy. We work a lot with the companies that are doing more of those hybrid products because people are wanting options. They don't want to, pay that. And if they don't need nursing, facilities or they don't need assisted living, then they feel like that's money wasted, kind of like term insurance, I guess. So they want to be able to know that if they're not going to need it for that kind of care, they can use it for something else. So we're seeing a real kind of directional shift there in terms of people wanting to find a product that can do, multiple things for them.
Right. And we've talked on this show before about good estate planning, having a good estate planning attorney to qualify for Medicaid, should you need long-term care.
Yeah, that's a complicated process. And for people who are in the middle classes, it's much more feasible. But when you rise into the, say, upper middle to upper, and people think, well, if they're upper class, they don't need it. But, the way that term is defined today by the consensus or the Census Bureau, I think that you're considered in the upper classes, you're above upper middle if you're at like $85,000 or something a year. It's just a very low number compared to what we know many people make. So we do advice regarding Medicaid qualification, and I think that's going to gain momentum, especially since we have a administration that's very friendly to Medicaid. They're encouraging the states to accept more money. but states realize that they have a corresponding matching obligation when they accept that money, and some are fearful of reaching out and grabbing this additional money that's being made available through the Biden administration because they figure that once you sign on, you've committed. And so they figure through good and bad times, they're going to have to keep providing this rich sort of more Californian or New York style benefits than you would normally find in the Midwest. So I don't think Missouri, to my knowledge, has accepted those funds, but many states will, of course. It's irresistible. But that will enlarge Medicaid a little bit, and it will make it more accessible to many people. But there still are a lot of people for whom the sort of costs you describe are going to be just insurmountable.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't really want to be in a Medicaid-run facility. I'm finding that even if that's their option, that's not an option that they would choose first. And so that seems to be the biggest concern that I hear from clients is that, they really don't, they want to put their loved ones in a facility that was going to take care of them the way that they would want them to be cared for. And so I think that we have a lot of challenges ahead if more and more people are going to need to be on Medicaid in order to have nursing home care. We're going to need to make sure those facilities really provide the kind of care that we would want our elders to have.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the enduring effects, one among many of the enduring effects of this pandemic is that people are starting to realize that, number one, they don't need, urban areas in which they're living, in these high-rise buildings and commuting in heavy traffic and dealing with all those things. Now they realize they can move outside, not just suburbs, but exurbs, that next ring outside major metropolitan areas. And I think the same thing is happening with people who've been in facilities for long-term care is that I think they're finding that, they can do some of those things at home and they can do more of them than they thought they could do at home. And to the extent that the taxpayer is unburdened to some extent by this decision, I see it as being a huge wave in the future because everybody's happy. To a point, it costs less. I emphasize to a point. To a point, it costs less for that sort of care. And the taxpayer wins people who want to live in place, retire in place, age in place.
Right.
Then that's what they want. So it is a win-win proposition.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next few years for sure.
Andy, I'm curious about something. We've had a few shows that we've done with people who have retired overseas, say Mexico. Do you have any clients that have done so?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have quite a few that are. Costa Rica is another really popular place that people like to go to. Because as I mentioned earlier, we do have a lot of clergy and ministers that are clients in our tax practice and that have, folded over into our wealth management practice as well. Very often they'll be on a mission trip and they'll decide that they want to stay there or go back there in retirement and live. And so it's not an uncommon thing. I think Costa Rica is becoming the more popular place I've been hearing about, but certainly Mexico might be on the list as well. And it's cheaper to live there.
Right.
But there are other things that they have to be thinking about in terms of how often would they want to be getting back to the States. And, think about COVID, many of them weren't able to come back because they were either going to have to quarantine or, different things were kind of prohibited for them to come back into this country. So it's certainly causing some people to think about what would happen before they move there.
And I'm sure many of your clients, this isn't a permanent move. They know at some point as they start aging and having more health problems, they want to get back to the States to be closer to family.
Yeah, exactly. They'll want to go for like those go-go years. They'll think, okay, we'll go to this other place and we can live more inexpensively. And certainly if they were there at some point as a missionary, they're able to go back to the community they already were familiar with. And so that provides them a little security, but eventually they want to come home. And so how do you set them up to be able to do that? And that's part of what we can do with our planning as well, is just make them think about those two stages of life and how we can plan for that appropriately.
Well, on average, how long do your clients stay?
Usually it's about 10 to 12 years. So it really depends on when they actually go there. And so if they're going there in their early 60s, we find that about 75 to 78 is the age in which they want to return to the United States. If, everybody's still in good health and there's no issues. But inevitably one person out of that couple might start having some health issues before the other, and therefore they may have to return earlier.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's a common pattern, even with Florida.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, I'm curious, you mentioned that, and you had told me this before, you and your dad are in business together. I guess it was originally your dad's financial planning practice. Is that true? And you joined him?
Yeah, so my dad was a Southern Baptist minister. And
I remember that.
Yeah. And he authored a book on taxation for ministers and clergy. And he just found that not only through authoring that book, but just working with people in his congregation, so many of their issues that they were having as a family or as a couple or in their marriages were related to money. And so the more that he started to really like talking about money and dealing with that, he thought this would be an extension of his ministry to go into practice full time. And so I started my career working with my dad and then left and did many other things and have just recently rejoined him in his practice as his partner and ultimate successor.
So your parents are doing fine because you said that they had COVID back in January?
Yes, they're doing well. It was a scary few weeks.
Yeah.
Not knowing what was going to happen. And I was exposed. So I was kind of waiting to get sick, but I think I have that, what they call the golden blood. I didn't get sick by the grace of God. So I was able to take care of them and they're doing well. And I'll get my second vaccine in a couple of days. So that'll be good.
Very good. And so you all practice in what city?
Well, our firm is located in Georgia, in Rome, Georgia, but I live in New York. So we work with people all over the country. We do a lot of virtual meetings, but because of our practice, we have clients in 17 states already.
So now your dad, though, is in Georgia?
Yes.
Okay. So you all, I guess, communicate a lot by phone, Zoom?
Yeah, so I spend 2 weeks in Georgia and 2 weeks in New York. So I go back and forth and then Zoom and FaceTime and GoToMeeting and WebEx and phone and all of that. We keep in touch. He was just buzzing me just now. So it's just kind of one of the, that's the one great thing I think that we've gathered from this pandemic is that you can stay connected. And so many other people have started to learn how to do that. And so we find that Zoom is a really great way to be able to connect with our older clients who don't have the mobility to come to our office. And it also helps us to be able to help more people by not being on the road so much.
And let me guess, it's 181 days in Georgia?
For how much time I'm spending down there?
For the residency?
Oh, listen, I have a home in New York, so I am still a resident of New York. I think as long as you own property, you still have to pay property tax, which is the real zinger here. So my son's in high school. Yeah, so once he graduates, we'll reevaluate where we're going to, live permanently.
I hear you. So it's a pleasure every time we talk. I know that our audience is tuned in, and they always have lots of questions. We need to be sure and post Andy's comments in response to some of the questions that we always get.
Absolutely.
Online. So, Andy, marvelous guest as always. Great topics. We hope to have you on again. I hope that you and your dad's practice continues to thrive. I bet you even have clients in Missouri.
We do. We do have clients in Missouri. So it's real fascinating to come back after, spending time away and taking care of my parents and being with them at this point in their lives is a real joy and an honor for me to be able to do as well. So it's a real special thing to do.
Marvelous. Well, we look forward to being able to do this again.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
We will. This has been another episode of Elder Talk. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Elder Talk with TuckerAllen, providing intelligent answers for those thinking about their future, with Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell. Sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Listen again next Saturday for another edition of Elder Talk with TuckerAllen. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.